As on this date, despite all the scientific advancements and technical progress all across the globe, it is not yet possible to exactly know what happens to a human life after death. To say the least, the minimum we expect is all our sufferings do come to a materialistic end as and when we leave this mortal world. But is it always like that? Is it common to all the people in the world? To all of you who have watched the first part of this video covering the life and death of the so-called ugliest woman on earth, Julia Pastrana, it might have seemed that all her miseries did come to a close after her rather unfortunate death. But in reality, she had to go through unimaginable sufferings for as long as 153 more number of years before everything finally ended for her. Stay tuned to part 2 of this intriguing journey as we discuss what happened to Julia Pastrana after her demise in 1860. On March 25, 1860, the day when Julia Pastrana died, her last words, according to some sources, were, "I die happy, knowing that I have been loved for my own sake." But was she ever loved by her husband Theodore Lent during her lifetime, or even after her death? The loss of his wife and his son was only a temporary setback for this cunning impresario Theodore Lent. He began searching for a mortician to embalm the bodies of Julia and his son for future display, and soon learned of a Professor Sokolov right there in Moscow, who was said to be the greatest embalmer in the world. Sokolov was an expert on embalming and had recently pioneered a technique that blended mummification with taxidermy, creating human corpses that still looked rosy and alive. So well preserved were Sokolov's corpses that they looked like wax dummies rather than real dead humans. Lent wasted little time figuring out what to do with his wife and his son. Not long after their deaths, the bodies were delivered to Sokolov for one purpose: to be embalmed, preserved like animals, and then made permanent fixtures at the Anatomical Museum at the University of Moscow. The entire embalming process took 6 months to complete. The accounts of what happened after this vary. In one version, Theodore Lent paid to have Pastrana embalmed but never agreed to allow Sokolov to keep them. In another account, Lent is said to have been so impressed by Sokolov's embalming techniques that he reneged on their deal. Theodore Lent produced their wedding certificate and enlisted American diplomats in Russia to affirm the document. They complied, and Lent revived the embalmed bodies for himself. Lent had sold his wife and the boy for 500 pounds. He got them back for nearly twice that amount. Dressed in one of her finest Spanish dresses, the already dead Julia Pastrana was soon on tour again with Theodore Jr. at her side, wearing a miniature sailor suit and mounted on a pedestal. An English naturalist named Buckland, who examined the stuffed corpses, wrote, "It was almost difficult to imagine that the mummy was really that of a human being and not an artificial model." By the spring of 1862, Julia Pastrana was again drawing the headlines and the gaze of the scientists in London. This time she was at the Burlington Gallery, and she was with her baby boy. By the spring of 1865, Theodore Lent was marketing a new exhibit. A woman named Mary Bartel, whom he claimed was Pastrana's sister. She was just 16 years old, 5 feet tall, and as one reporter described her, resembling her departed relative in her baboon-like features. Lent renamed her as Miss Zenora Pastrana. Zenora had nothing to do with Julia actually. She was from Sweden and had hirsutism, a condition that causes women to have male-like hair growth. Lent met and married her, and by the following year, the couple was once again touring Europe. For more than 10 years, they signed lucrative circus contracts with Europe's finest circuses and gave private performances for several royal families. Meanwhile, a museum in Vienna paid Lent to house Julia Pastrana and her son. When Lent and Zenora retired in St. Petersburg in the 1880s, the exhibit was still there. It wasn't until after Lent suffered an acute weakening of the brain and was placed in an insane asylum where he presumably died. Zenora moved back to Germany and sold the embalmed bodies of Julia and the child, which then shuttled among fairs, amusement parks, museums, chambers of horror throughout Europe for the coming decades. In 1921, Håkon Lund, manager of Norway's then biggest carnival, purchased the bodies of Julia and her son from an American in Berlin. They arrived as part of a cabinet of curiosities that held 8,000 other objects, including body parts submerged in giant glass jars, preserved heads, deformed fetuses. That show toured through Norway in the 1920s with the slogan, "Humanity, Know Thyself." By then, however, the culture around exhibiting human oddities had started to change. As the 19th century progressed, freak exhibitions fell more and more out of favor. During the World War II, the Nazis deemed the exhibit obscene and ordered the wax models to be melted down for candles, an order which Lund managed to avoid. After surviving the war, Julia's bodies went into storage in the 1950s. By the 1970s, when the bodies emerged for small tours, they were frequently greeted by outrage in the local newspapers. In 1973, Sweden banned their presence, saying corpses could no longer be exhibited for profit. The scene around was now changing. This marked the end of their touring days, and Lund stashed the mummies in the carnival storehouse near Oslo. 3 years later, teenagers broke in and ripped off Julia's arm, thinking she was just a mannequin. The police later recovered the bodies, but Julia's infant was damaged beyond repair. He ended up in the trash. During the 1990s, after reading about Julia Pastrana in crime journal, Jan Bondesson decided to examine her. So he wrote to the department director, who granted him access, and Bondesson soon found himself in a dark basement. Pastrana's nearly naked body was attached to a large board there. All that was left of her original costume was a pair of boots. She was missing an arm, and one of her eyes was gone. There was obviously no sign of her son. After Bondesson published his findings, a frenzy over Pastrana's body started anew in the mid-1990s. In the spring of 1995, the director of the University of Oslo convened a committee to evaluate Pastrana's case. By November, a conclusion had been reached. Pastrana had been treated in an ethically reprehensible manner. Though an administrative board at the university argued that she could be buried in Norway, she was instead placed in a sealed coffin and stored in a temperature-regulated and moisture-controlled room at the university. There, amidst a vast assortment of bones and other archaeological relics known as the Schreiner Collection, she was under the care of Holk, who believed her body could be useful for medical examinations. The few facts of Pastrana's life that are known had become fodder for all manner of creative interpretation. In 1961, an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents focused on a Pastrana-like character who seeks revenge against her handlers. In 1964, an Italian film, La Donna Scimmia, the Ape Woman, imagined Pastrana as an introspective Neapolitan who falls in love with a shrewd manager. In the play The True History of the Tragic Life and Triumphant Death of Julia Pastrana, the ugliest woman in the world, she isn't seen at all. Most productions are staged entirely in the dark. After The True History opened in England in 1998, an American theatre producer named Kathleen Culebro saw it in a small community centre just outside London in 2002. Culebro was impressed, so she brought it to the United States, first to Texas, then to the Greenwich Street Theatre in New York. She enlisted her sister Laura Anderson Barbata for costume design, and she immediately found herself drawn to Pastrana. Barbata raised all kinds of important issues of human trafficking and objectification, and most pressing, what can be done with her corpse right now? Anderson also wanted to know how, for instance, the collection benefited the advance of science and medicine, and what, as the Shriner's curator Holk thought, were inappropriate and appropriate uses of indigenous human remains. She wanted to know what kind of medical research has been conducted on Pastrana, and why her body, instead of just a tissue sample, needed to be preserved. On September 2nd, 2005, Holk responded with a series of brief answers, which summarized, "So far no examinations on Julia Pastrana have been carried out, nor have they been planned." There were a lot of ups and downs and involvement from Sinaloan historian Mimi Aga, Mario Lopez Valdez, the governor of Sinaloa, his chief of staff Gustavo Zavala. Soon, Mexico's Secretary of Foreign Relations was involved, and the governor had contacted HOLC and the Ethics Board. The citizens of Mexico under law have rights during their life and after it, Lopez Valdez wrote in a letter in March 2012. Numerous agencies were now prepared to aid in the repatriation process. On a bright clear afternoon in February, a white SUV rolled down the bumpy grey streets of Sinaloa de Leyva. As a procession of hundreds trailed behind, cameramen and photographers angled for shots. Inside the SUV was a painted wooden casket draped in white roses. Inside that was a zinc box. Julia Pastrana was finally home. There, on February 12th in the Central Plaza, Pastrana's coffin was placed on a stage between two large coronas of white roses, lilies and daisies. There were human rights themed speeches from the governor, the mayor and Anderson Barbata as well. As Julia Pastrana's coffin was carried into the cemetery and lowered into the ground, Anderson Barbata silently watched. It wasn't until a few hours later, after the governor had left and the concrete had been poured, that somebody asked her to say something. That's when I said, I think we should all say Julia Pastrana rest in peace, Anderson Barbata recalls. But we should not say it quietly. We should say it really loud, proudly, so they can hear it all the way around the world. Julia Pastrana's display for profit and entertainment was a prototype of the popular 19th century American freak shows. To the world, she was nothing more than an aberration, something grotesque that was paraded before others just for money and trained to do tricks like circus animals. But for the very few who knew Julia Pastrana better, she was a warm human being, very thoughtful, spiritually very gifted, with a sensitive heart and mind. If you enjoyed watching this video, feel free to share your comments and subscribe to this channel. See you all in a while. Thank you.